The palace corridors were silent. Night had spread over Jerusalem, and the young King Solomon's eyes were heavy with exhaustion. He had inherited a prosperous kingdom from his father, David, but ruling Israel would not be an easy task. The weight of responsibility was beginning to settle on his shoulders. Then, on that very night, something extraordinary happened. While he slept, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream and asked a question that would change his life forever. "Ask what you wish, and I will give it to you." A divine offer like this could drive any man to madness. Solomon could have asked for gold, vast lands, unbeatable armies, or a long and carefree life. However, a deeper concern stirred within him. How could he govern such a great people without wisdom? So, with humility, Solomon responded, "Give your servant a wise heart to judge your people and discern between good and evil." The Lord was deeply pleased with his request. Not only did God grant Solomon unparalleled understanding, but he also promised him something he had not even asked for: riches, honor, and a glory no other king would ever have. From that day on, Solomon's life changed completely. His name echoed beyond the borders of Israel. Rulers, merchants, and scholars from distant lands traveled to hear him speak. His discernment was unmatched, and his judgments were as sharp as a blade. One of the most famous episodes occurred when two women disputed the motherhood of a baby. With no witnesses or proof, Solomon went beyond the obvious. He ordered that the child be cut in half, with one part given to each woman. The true mother's desperation revealed the truth, and his decision became a symbol of absolute wisdom. However, what truly solidified his position as the most prosperous king in the world was his ability to manage wealth and build strategic alliances. Jerusalem became the grandest city of its time. The Queen of Sheba, upon hearing of his fame, traveled with a great entourage, bringing gold, precious stones, and rare spices. After witnessing Solomon's wisdom, she was left speechless. His wealth was overwhelming, but what truly impressed her was his brilliant mind. The peak of his reign came with the construction of the Temple of the Lord, a massive project made with the finest materials. Every stone, every piece of gold, and every detail was meticulously designed to honor the God of Israel. Solomon's prosperity seemed limitless. Everything he touched multiplied. Gold flowed like a river, and the people lived in times of abundance. It seemed that nothing could shake his kingdom. But it was precisely at this moment of glory that the first subtle deviation began to take place. A small detail that, in the eyes of many, might have seemed insignificant, but in the end, it would change his story forever. The golden glow shone in every corner of Jerusalem. Solomon's reign had reached its peak, and the city had become the epicenter of global wealth. Gold and silver were so common that they no longer held the same value as before. The royal palace's treasures multiplied, and ships loaded with precious goods constantly arrived at Israel's ports. In no time, the kingdom had become the most prosperous on earth. With his unmatched wisdom, Solomon knew how to expand his influence. He formed strategic alliances with neighboring powers, sealing political marriages with foreign princesses. Each agreement brought new trade routes, stronger armies, and most importantly, more gold into the royal treasury. His palace was a masterpiece. Marble, cedar from Lebanon, towering columns, and hand-carved details made the king's residence a construction of absolute splendor. No other monarch had ever ruled with such luxury. The Temple of the Lord, his greatest achievement, had become the spiritual and political center of Israel. Built with the finest materials of the time, it had golden columns, cedar doors, and ornaments crafted by skilled artisans. Its grandeur reflected the glory of Solomon's reign. Prosperity seemed endless. Caravans brought spices, precious stones, and exotic animals. The streets buzzed with merchants from all over the world, eager to do business in the city of the wise king. But amid all of this, something silent began to grow in Solomon's heart. The desire for more. The abundance of wealth, which had once been a blessing, was now becoming an invisible burden. Each new palace required more gold, each new treaty required more alliances, and each alliance came with new demands. The king, who had once asked for wisdom alone, now found himself surrounded by an ambition that grew by the day. He began to ignore the limits set by God. Instead of trusting divine provision, he excessively increased taxes and military forces. The people, once prosperous, began to feel the weight of royal rule. The political alliances that were once strategic started to become spiritually dangerous. The foreign wives who came with promises of peace also brought their customs and beliefs. Altars were silently built in honor of strange gods. And Solomon, the wisest man in history, did something he should have never done. The cold wind blew over Jerusalem. The glow of gold still shone, but something invisible had changed. The king's heart was no longer the same. Solomon, who had begun his reign with an unshakable love for God, was now lost in his own greatness. The weight of power and the insatiable desire for more led him to cross a dangerous line. The same man who had built the magnificent temple of the Lord now allowed other gods to be worshipped within his kingdom. It was his foreign wives who led him into this trap. The king, who had married for political strategy, ended up being spiritually seduced. Egyptian, Moabite, Ammonite, Sidonian, and Hittite princesses brought with them their gods, beliefs, and practices. And little by little, the city of God began to be contaminated by pagan rituals. The first statue erected in honor of Astarte, the goddess of fertility, seemed like just a small detail. But soon, altars for Molech, Baal, and other foreign gods followed. And Solomon did not just allow it. He participated. The man who was once the wisest of all now made offerings to idols he had previously despised. God himself had already warned, "You must not take foreign wives, lest they turn your heart toward other gods." But Solomon did not listen. Prophets began to rise. Men sent by God warned the king that his idolatry would bring destruction. The same God who had given him wealth and wisdom now declared that the consequence of his disobedience would be the division of the kingdom. "Since you have done this and have not kept my covenant, I will tear the kingdom away from you." Solomon realized too late that his pursuit of power had made him forget who truly owned everything. And like an empire that grows without a firm foundation, everything was about to collapse. The streets of Jerusalem were no longer the same. The people, who once walked in peace under the reign of the wisest king on earth, now whispered softly in discontent. Something was wrong. Taxes were increasing, the burden of labor was becoming unbearable, and the city that had once been a symbol of prosperity now began to taste the bitterness of dissatisfaction. The priests watched as pagan altars multiplied, and even without the courage to oppose the king directly, they knew that God would not remain silent. Then, the wrath of the Lord was revealed. The warning was clear and direct: the kingdom would be torn apart. "Since you have done this and have not kept my covenant, I will surely tear this kingdom away from you and give it to your servant." But God, out of love for David his father, decided that this would not happen during Solomon's lifetime. The kingdom would be divided after his death, an inevitable judgment already sealed in time. Solomon, who had once been feared and respected, now saw his authority being challenged. Rebellions began to rise both within and outside the kingdom. Neighboring nations, once submissive, now stood against Israel. Even Jeroboam, one of his own servants, received a prophecy declaring that he would rule part of Israel. The kingdom was already breaking apart before the king had even died. And Solomon, now old and weary, realized that all the gold, all his wisdom, and all his power were not enough to preserve what truly mattered. The man who had once received everything from God now saw his achievements slipping through his fingers like sand in the wind. It was in this moment of deep anguish that he wrote the saddest words of his entire journey. "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does a man gain from all his labor under the sun?" At last he understood, all wealth without God is nothing but an empty illusion of glory. But now, it was too late to turn back. Israel's fate was already sealed. The sun no longer shone with the same intensity over Jerusalem. Solomon, now old and weary, spent his days reflecting on everything he had built, and everything he had lost. The kingdom was still standing, but the cracks were visible. God's promises were certain, and Solomon knew that his disobedience had come at a high cost. He looked at the grand palaces, the countless treasures, the magnificent temple he had built for God, and the pagan altars he had allowed to be erected. And all of it seemed insignificant in the face of the truth he had finally understood. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. Solomon had now seen firsthand what many fail to realize. No amount of wealth can replace a life lived in obedience to God. He finally understood. Money cannot be the foundation of your security. It can disappear in an instant. Bad alliances can lead to destruction. Choosing the right influences around you determines your destiny. True prosperity comes from God. Gold and silver may be blessings, but without Him, they become mere burdens. Disobedience to God has consequences. No human wisdom can protect someone with a corrupted heart. And now, the question is, what can we learn from this? If Solomon, with all his wisdom, strayed from the right path because of money, power, and bad influences, could we not also be at risk? How many people today place their achievements above their faith? How many trade their principles for status? How many make the wrong alliances and then wonder why everything went wrong? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet lose their soul? Solomon's greatest legacy was not his gold, his palaces, or even his temple. His final lesson was this: without God, everything is vanity. Now I ask you, what are you building? If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me, which of these lessons impacted your life the most? And if you want to learn more about the secrets of biblical prosperity, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next video. May God bless and protect you.